Welcome to Embedded FM, the show for people who love building gadgets. I'm Alicia White, here with Christopher White. This week we have Natalie Silvanovich. We're going to talk about electronic pets.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi.
Could you tell us a bit about yourself?
So I'm Natalie Silvanovich, and I really enjoy hacking children's toys, especially Tamagotchis. I've done a few projects related to that, so I'm hoping to talk a bit about them today.
Well, I have to admit, I sort of missed the Tamagotchi craze. I mean, I knew what they were, but for people who don't, we do have listeners outside the US, and I'm sure in Japan they all know, but what is a Tamagotchi?
Sure thing. Actually, it's a good thing to go through because they've actually changed a lot. You might remember in the 1990s when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, they were the first really electronic toy for kids. They had a screen and buttons, and they would have a picture of a pet on them, and then you could feed it, you could play with it, you can clean up after it even, and that was all the functionality.
And they died if you didn't take care of them, right?
Yes. They're a little bit ambiguous on that subject. You know, sometimes they die, sometimes they run away. They don't want to traumatize children too much. But yeah, it's basically like a game. And if you don't play the game well, you die or you don't get to play anymore, at least.
Sometimes they go back to the farm.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
I had a dog that did that.
But anyhow, they've evolved a lot, especially recently. So the first one I looked at was called the Tamatown Tamago, and it was still black and white, but had a lot of other features in it. For example, your Tamagotchi would grow up, get a job, get married, have kids, buy appliances, that sort of thing.
Buy appliances.
Would it support you in your retirement?
No, not really. They're still just as needy as they used to be. And they also had this great feature. You could basically buy what they called figures, which were kind of expansion packs where you could put them on and you could play different games with your Tamagotchi, get different items, that sort of thing. And even more recently, I've been working with some cooler Tamagotchis. There is the Tamagotchi Friends, which has NFC on it, except it's not true NFC, it's actually RFID. And if you tap them together, though, you can send text messages, they can play with each other. That sort of thing. And then I also got a Japanese version, which is full NFC. So what you can do with it, it's called the Tamagotchi for You, is you can get your phone and even buy items using the app on your phone and then flash them to your Tamagotchi. So it's a 32-bit ARM Tamagotchi, and it's just over the top with features.
Apps and everything. But so one of the things I saw from looking at some of your presentations is they can have babies.
Yes, they can.
And one reason to hack them was to RFID impregnate everybody else's?
I heard that. It was not my idea. It was actually maybe 10 years ago now. Someone in Make Magazine, they had an article about hacking Tamagotchis, and then one of the comments was, I want to make it so my laptop can impregnate all the kids' Tamagotchis and then just walk around with it. I actually don't think that's possible because to save batteries, all the interactions between Tamagotchis have to be initiated by the user. You know, it's not just listening for radio all the time. You have to actually start it to turn that part of the circuit on. So you can realistically do that, but you can definitely expand the range of possibilities. For example, you can make 2 guy Tamagotchis have a baby if you hack it. Meanwhile, in real life, with real Tamagotchis, it would prevent that. Also, you don't have to wait usually you have to wait until your Tamagotchi is an adult for it to have a baby. But if you hack it, you can just any Tamagotchi can have a baby with any Tamagotchi.
So can you practice Tamagotchi eugenics?
Well, it's funny. That was one of my goals. Maybe eugenics is a strong word, but I wanted to be able to, like any other video game, the better you play, the better character you get. If you take perfect care of it, you get a really beautiful one. And if you don't take good care of it, you get a whiny one. So I wanted to figure out how to get the best Tamagotchi. But I found out that basically who their parents are is a very, very small factor compared to how you take care of them. So yeah,
it's all about nurture over nature, and you can't breed a Tamagotchi that's beautiful and not whiny.
Exactly. Actually, one of my other goals is to answer what I called the deeper questions of Tamagotchi life. Basically, what determines whether you win or lose the game? What makes them run away? What determines what they grow into? What decides whether they're born a girl or a boy? All those questions that Tamagotchi fans like me, spend a lot of time debating. I thought, if I look at the code, if I dump it and put it in IDA, I can definitively answer these questions.
Well, and we should talk more about that. So you took them apart, and then, you took many of them apart. You had nice pictures of piles of Tamagotchis who died for this effort.
Yes, unfortunately, it's a destructive process, but I really had two goals with these, and I'm still working on it. But basically, one is to get a code dump and basically answer all the questions about the Tamagotchi, be able to get all the images of all the Tamagotchis you can get, figure out what makes you win and lose every game, that sort of thing. The other half was I wanted to make a Tamagotchi dev kit so that you could basically run your own code on the Tamagotchi.
So just opening it, looking at the hardware, what's in there? You already said IDA, which I think we know from Micah's visit here is the disassembler, but just opening it, what would I find? Are they potted or are they?
Yeah, they are potted. Basically, you open up, you find a big blob, and what's under the blob is actually a 6502 processor by a company called General Plus. I'm laughing because Chris over there showed a lot of enthusiasm for 6502, as many people do.
Well, and I have a lot of enthusiasm for General Plus because we used them at Leapfrog.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to talk to you afterwards because one of the challenges I had with General Plus is that a very small number of people have actually used the processors. I've heard it called the largest microprocessor company that no one's ever heard of.
Oh, yeah.
And I found there was basically lots of challenges in getting documentation and the information I needed to actually understand them well enough to write code for them.
They were a bit secretive. Yes. We can talk about that later. But what else does it have? It's got the display.
Yeah, I guess the General Plus element is called an LCD controller, and then it connects to the General Plus LCD, and basically everything it needs to use the LCD is on chip. The only piece of hardware that's really been added in, I guess there's a few, but the only really functional one is there's a beeper on it so it can make noise, and that plugs into the General Plus SPU, which is also on board. There's, of course, buttons that go into it, and then a few elements like voltage regulators, and there's also an EEPROM, but basically that's the entire device. There's not a lot of stuff on the board other than that LCD controller.
But it's got an EEPROM and not just a mask ROM or something.
It does. Now, the EEPROM is not for code, which was a challenge. Basically, back in the day when I was a kid, if my Tamagotchi ran out of batteries or reset, that was it. It was done. You had to start from the beginning. Now it actually saves state. So if you have to reset it, it'll deserialize the state and then give you your game back. So that's what the EEPROM is for. But all the code is on mask ROM on board the LCD controller.
And so that was one of the things with General Plus is it was always masked ROM because you're doing millions of units. And the General Plus processors are 20 cents. That's kind of a high-end one for them.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually interesting. For all the American versions, they still use mask ROM, although I've noticed recently they've started ramping up the rate at which they come out with new masks. It used to be that for every Tamagotchi there was one rev, but the latest one, which came out just 2 years ago, there's actually been 3 revs of mask ROM since then. So I'm not sure how that plugs into cost. I'm trying to wonder if, maybe it's cheaper to do the new masks these days than it used to. But I've noticed they are starting to, even though they use mask ROM, come out with new ROMs a lot more quickly.
Somebody I was talking to last week said, why would you ever do masked ROM? Flash is so easy, and you have to do firmware updates. And thinking about toys, I was like, no, you really don't have to do firmware updates.
Yeah, definitely for a Tamagotchi. Even how would you ever do a firmware? Unless you have the other infrastructure you need, then using Flash isn't the greatest thing. Although there is one area where they swap between BitROM or mask ROM and Flash, and that's for these figure accessories. Actually, it was kind of exciting. The first ones I got were all mask ROM, and it was interesting. They contained some jumpers, and then when you bought different figures, it was actually 3 different plastic shells, because they're supposed to be different Tamagotchi characters, but 3 of them would all have the same mask ROM in it, and then the jumpers would just be set differently to give you the functionality of each character. And I think that was another cost-saving thing. You're better off getting a big mask ROM and have it made lots of times and then just disable the parts you don't need versus having a different one for every figure. But then they came out with some higher-end figures, which were like hand-painted in a smaller run, and they all had Flash in it, I'm assuming because it was cheaper. But what was also nice about that is that made them programmable. So when I did my Tamagotchi dev kit, it's based on those figures that are programmable, because then you can basically program them directly and put them on top of the Tamagotchi.
Okay, so you opened the Tamagotchi, you looked at what's inside. You determined that you couldn't actually read out the general plus code?
I did eventually. That was quite a challenge. It took me a while to figure out how to do it. What I ended up doing is these figures, as I mentioned, you can reprogram them. And I found basically a vulnerability in how it processed the stuff on the figure. So if you reprogrammed it for certain games, it'll jump into a jump table to go to some code in the ROM of the Tamagotchi, but it didn't check the bounds on that. So if you put in a really high number, it would jump somewhere outside of the table, which was actually an instruction. And I ended up finding somewhere it jumped that it would actually jump into the LCD RAM. So the way my dev kit actually works is you put the figure on, it fills up the LCD with shell code, and then uses this bug to jump to it. And then it starts executing out of the LCD RAM, which will then jump into the regular RAM.
It's like a string copy overflow. I mean, it's just sort of exactly how you hack things.
I know, it was funny to find. What was different here is one of the challenges of it is you have no debug output. So, like, the way I found this was basically I tried changing random values in these figure ROMs, which was actually 2 minutes per trial. So it was not a fast process. But there were only 255 different values of this one that had the weird behavior. So I tried different values, and I eventually found one that was behaving inconsistently enough. I thought it might be executing random stuff, and then kept working with that one so that I could get it to the first bug I tried actually executed code very, very inconsistently, but it was enough that I could use that to basically dump the code out of the buttons. I attached wires to the buttons and then had it use SPI to tell me what the code was. And once I dumped the code, I could find a better bug that I could use to execute code all the time. So
you jumped to something that basically read out the ROM image.
Yeah.
And then that's when you started to use the disassembler, the IDA program?
Yeah. I mean, it was a little bit different than that. You can actually execute code out of RAM in a Tamagotchi, so I just jumped to code that I'd written in RAM, but same concept. And then that code, just dumped the code so that I had a copy of it.
So you put the code out the buttons, like you made those outputs and
Yeah, I mean, they're inputs, but you just have to set a different register for them to be outputs. And then I just used SPI to dump the code out.
And read it with something else?
Yeah, I read it with a Soleil logic analyzer.
Aren't those wonderful?
Oh, yeah, they're my favorite thing. There were 2 tools I really used for the Tamagotchi stuff. One was an Arduino board, which I basically just used when I needed to jiggle pins for whatever reason, and I used the Soleil logic analyzer, and that was basically all I needed to get this done.
Well, but you had to read out a couple of K of code. You didn't hand parse all of that and write it down, did you?
No, the Soleil logic analyzer, if you use SPI, it can actually export it as bytes, and then I use that feature to get it all.
And we've seen that I only use the protocol analyzer when I'm actually staring at it. So, all right, you can download bytes. Yay, good to know. So why? I mean, really, this is very cool. Why?
This is definitely my frequently asked question.
Why not?
Don't worry. Basically, yes. As you might have guessed, I'm a bit of an enthusiast of the Tamagotchi, and as a kid, I always wondered how it worked. Me and a friend, the girl next door, we would get graph paper and draw the pixels and try and figure out, how often does it walk across the screen? Is there a pattern to the motion? And then one day I realized I'm an adult and I can actually figure this stuff out unequivocally.
Were you an engineer? What is your background, actually?
Yeah, I guess I was an engineer when I did this. I studied electrical engineering at UBC, and then my first job was at BlackBerry on their security team. And that's when I started doing this project. So I had some experience hacking mobile devices, but not so much hardware. So this is really my first foray into hardware hacking.
And did you at any point think this is going to become big such that I would talk about it a lot at mini conferences?
Absolutely not. Actually, even the first conference I did, I was surprised that anyone was interested.
And which one was that?
I was CCC.
And that was a pretty popular talk. I saw it on YouTube, I think.
You know, I was surprised by the enthusiasm I got. Also, at that point, I was stuck. So one of the reasons I did the talk was to kind of ask for help and see who contacted me. And I was actually overwhelmed by the number of responses I got.
So have you had any contact or interest from, I don't know who makes Tamagotchi, the Tamagotchi Overlord Corporation?
Yes, a Tamagotchi is made by Bandai, and I have never heard from them, and that surprises me.
Well, I mean, it's better to never hear than a cease and desist.
I know, and actually, at the time I started this, I could never find a contact at Bandai, but the more recent ones, the NFC ones, they actually have to file with the FCC. So now I have a few emails of Bandai engineers, but I can't quite decide whether to reach out to them or not.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it might really amuse them to see that somebody has spent so much time thinking and working with their things.
Yeah, we'll see. Actually, one thing that's held me back is that Tamagotchi is clearly not developed in English, and actually, like, as soon as you do something a bit odd, it suddenly starts running on the Tamagotchi in Japanese. That's obviously their default development language, and then they put in the English at the last minute. So I do kind of wonder if I wrote to them if I would get someone who spoke English at all.
Google Translate works.
No.
No? No. Okay.
I think that would lead to them just being very confused about what I was talking about.
Are there any Easter eggs in the code or things that surprised you, having used it for a while, things you didn't know about or expect?
For sure. Like, there were the things I guess I was sort of expecting to find, which was basically the definitive growth chart, all like kind of the answers to the questions of how it worked. But some of them were a bit interesting. For example, I discovered you could potty train your Tamagotchi. If you took... Basically, the way the modern ones work is when your Tamagotchi needs to go to the potty, it starts doing the potty dance. And then if you drag it to the potty when it's doing that, it'll use it. Otherwise, you have to clean up after it. But I discovered that if you actually catch it doing the potty dance enough, it'll actually just start using the toilet on its own, and then you don't have to worry about it at all.
Wow, the miracles of potty training. Were other people surprised to hear that they could potty train their Tamagotchi?
Well, it's yes, they were. It's actually on the forums. It's been a subject of discussion. Every so often, one person says, I potty train my Tamagotchi. But it happens so rarely that people were like, no, that person is nuts. But I saw it in the code, and actually I was eventually able to do it. So we now have proof that you can potty train it. The other thing I found that was really cool is I found basically their debug mode. That's kind of early Tamagotchi hacking. For the earliest versions, there were actually jumpers on the back you could use to put it into debug mode. So you actually had to take it apart and solder it. And then you could use it in this mode. It lets you do things like set whatever character you want, fast forward time, the sort of things you would need to do if there was a bug in the Tamagotchi and you wanted to make it happen multiple times. Now, on these new Tamagotchis, no one could figure out how to put them into debug mode. But then eventually I figured out if you put the flash in the figure a certain way, that's what triggered the debug mode. So I was able to do that, and that's kind of fun. Then I could get like any character I wanted. And then even for potty training, I could just like set the bit so it's potty trained and not even have to do it.
Woohoo! Are there Tamagotchi conferences? I mean, you've spoken at computer conferences.
Yeah. There are, like, there's online a few communities, but not so much.
They were big communities. I was so surprised. I was spending so much time going, what?
Yeah, well, like, there's definitely fans, although I've never heard of a conference, at least not an English language one. And I would have to say that I've kind of got, mixed reviews of my work from people who are big Tamagotchi fans. There's some people who think it's really cool, and there's some people who think I'm destroying the magic.
Yeah, I was about to say, piercing the mystery.
Yeah, and then there's also people who kind of question the authoritativeness of what I'm doing. Like, before, the way you got all your information about a Tamagotchi was that you would observe what it did, and there was always disagreements, but the disagreements always ended in, well, my Tamagotchi might have done this, your Tamagotchi might have done that, and, who knows what you saw. So when I come in and say, like, no, there is actually a definitive way you can figure out exactly what it will and will not do, and that's, like, the final answer, a lot of people are kind of taken aback by that, and kind of don't trust that there can be that type of answer for something that's been, like, a shrouded in mystery for so long.
Did you feel like one of those doctors who used to practice on cadavers before it was legal and it was all a shady underpinning of British or society, Italian society?
Funnily enough, I get asked that a lot too. Sometimes, but I'd say mostly I consider it a technical problem. Actually, compared to some fans I've met, I don't really think my Tamagotchis are alive.
Are people totally appalled by the idea of taking apart what is their pet? I mean, if you tried to take apart my beagle, I would be pretty irate.
Oh, definitely there are, especially like there's little kids on this forum, and some of them are still at the age where they do think it's real, and then, this 8-year-old's like, oh, I love my Tamas so much, I would never hurt him. And actually, one of the funniest emails I got was from this 11-year-old Russian hacker who was like, oh, I'm a fan of your work. I want to hack my Furby. Can you help me with it? And then I'm like, sure. And then he gets back to me and he's like, I'm sorry, I can't hack my Furby because I asked it and it said no.
It didn't give consent.
Yeah. I thought it was adorable because this kid was obviously still at an age where he truly thought his Furby was real.
Wow. Have there been other toys you've hacked?
Mostly the Tamagotchis. I've strayed a little bit into other virtual pets, like nano pets, some generic ones. I've done nothing quite as in-depth, but I do enjoy just taking them apart and looking at how the circuit boards differ. The Tamagotchi was actually very well made, and some of the 90s ones were definitely like not that level. Like one thing that blew my mind is I actually ordered a nano pet because that was my favorite type when I was a kid, and then it didn't work. So I'm like, well, I might as well take it apart. And I discovered, okay, there was a huge solder bridge on it, and then it was a one-sided PCB, and they had at some point drilled 2 holes through it and then put a wire bridge on the back and then put it back through and then put masking tape on the wire bridge to prevent it from like rubbing against the other components.
I'm telling you, toy engineering is all about the pennies. Masking tape is cheap.
Absolutely. And I suspect, it might have just been cheap, or it could have been, it's like, well, we've made all these boards. We can either throw them away or we can put a piece of masking tape on them.
I would have used Kapton tape, but then in the factory, they would have changed it to masking tape.
Yeah, no, it made me sad, though, because this type of pet I really enjoyed, they're just not going to survive at all because of the way they were engineered. It's, I guess, I hate to say maybe like 15 years now, maybe more. And yeah, there's like no way they're going to survive like another 10 years.
Oh, the longevity of our electronic pets. That's just sad.
That's not a word.
Longevity. Longevity?
That's the word.
Thank you. Whatever. We're not cutting that because Christopher finds it amusing when I can't figure out the words. I remember in college, a woman from Mattel came and to our engineering club and gave this talk that I don't remember anything about the talk except that she brought a Barbie doll and an X-Acto knife. And we looked at Barbie's skeleton, and I was, from that point, fascinated by the thought and engineering that goes into toys. Not just the cheapness part, which is sort of fascinating that you can do buttons for that cheap. But there's a reason why the knees click. it made me, I mean, I was already in engineering school, but it made me want to do more with mechanical and electrical and less with software. Did the Tamagotchi draw you into your electrical engineering field, or was it just unrelated?
Is there something I did, I guess, after I had decided to pursue that field?
Well, but you played with them before.
Oh, yeah.
I understand hacking came later, but...
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. I've never really thought of it that way, but definitely my enthusiasm for electronics, probably including Tamagotchis, was one of the things that got me into it for sure.
What else drew you into engineering?
I guess I just enjoy it. I also really like to program, and I enjoy software. And I'll admit, maybe when I signed up, I wasn't clear on what the difference between software engineering and computer engineering and electrical engineering were. So I picked electrical because the classes I could sign up for sounded the most interesting. But yeah, I'd say I really enjoy learning about software and just making things work. There's like nothing more rewarding when is it a board or a piece of software, and you start from nothing and it actually works.
And now Tamagotchi hacking definitely is not your full-time job, right?
No, I wish it was maybe, but I'm actually on a team called Project Zero at Google, and we're focused on the software that has the most users with regards to security, and we try to find bugs that we think attackers might be using and get them fixed.
You recently wrote a blog post about a Flash bug, which, I mean, I keep hearing Flash is just so ridiculously insecure, but you have one that's incredibly reliable, that it's easy to reproduce. Can you tell us?
Yes. Yeah, that was some interesting research to do. Basically, since I joined Project Zero, I've been focused on Flash. I've found a fair number of bugs in it, but this particular bug I thought was special in that I thought it could be exploited very reliably. Most exploitation methods used in Flash, they're fairly reliable, but they don't reach the 100% reliable. But the nature of this bug, it was type confusion, and you could basically use integers and floats to overwrite pointers. And I thought the nature of that made it so that you could basically exploit it much more reliably than most bugs.
Is it weird being known as the Tamagotchi person in security circles?
Yeah, I definitely get some interesting comments.
How do these things go together? I mean, they're both reverse engineering and looking, I mean, what skills are the same and what skills are just not transferable?
That's an interesting question. And I find it sometimes, I probably talk about my Tamagotchi hobby way too much, often to people who do like real hardware security and real software security. And I'd say it's the same concepts. Definitely working in security like made me believe I could do it. Probably if you'd asked me a few years earlier if I could take the device and get all the code out of it, I would have been like, no way. But after working in security and realizing that most things do have problems you can take advantage of, I was a lot more confident. But what I ended up dealing with was the big differences between the high-end and the low-end devices. And I mostly worked in the mobile space. So that tends to be, ARM processors that are like fairly high-end as far as processors go. They have a lot of security features, that sort of thing. So quite often, I'll tell people about this and they'll be like, well, did you have to deal with non-executable memory, that sort of thing? And the answer is no, because the sort of 20-cent processor used on a Tamagotchi doesn't have those type of features.
It doesn't have many types of features.
Yes, but then the challenges were kind of the reverse. So the things that they put in for cheapness that weren't necessarily intended to make it difficult to reverse engineer, but did. So for example, everyone will ask, oh, well, did you have debug output? And it's like, ha, ha, ha.
There's no
never.
Debug serial port? No.
Yeah, like I had two outputs, which was looking at the screen and listening to it, and I did everything with that. Also, just the sheer lack of documentation and I guess general interest in these sort of small processors was another challenge. So things like, find the docs, that sort of thing, weren't applicable. So I'd say it's kind of the same skill set, but definitely like high end versus low end in terms of hardware is just a completely like different problem.
If somebody asked how should they get into being a security engineer, what would you recommend?
I'm really in favor of just trying stuff and doing stuff. I'd say, find something you're interested in and learn a lot about it. Be it, if you want to hack websites, there's lots of different things online, either, hackable websites, that sort of thing that you can try. I'd also recommend, if you're interested in finding vulnerabilities, to look at existing vulnerabilities and, understand how they work. And I'd say just really dig in and do it. I find I do meet a lot of people who are like, how can I get into security? And, say they're really interested in it. But then if you ask them, well, have you read anything about it? Have you tried anything? They haven't. So I think, if you're interested in it, the important thing is to kind of show your interest and read about security, do things, that sort of thing.
It gets a little difficult because the community around security can be a little more vicious than the community around other forms of even reverse engineering. Have you found that to be true? It seems true. I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit. And yeah, I'd say I felt that a little bit when I was getting into it, that it definitely there are people who, might make fun of you if you don't know stuff. That's said, it's in the last few years, it's really improved a lot in that regard. I know recently, say at DEF CON, there's been a lot of, beginners classes people can take and go to. And it never used to be like that. But I think there's a lot more people who are focused in getting into the community. And the other thing is that, at least the way I started, I started off maybe not by necessarily trying to engage in the community right away, but just, by reading a few interesting papers every week, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's the way to go. You should be a little bit more knowledgeable. Walking in and saying, I want to be a security person, and not having any passwords on your device seems like a good way to learn a lot about security in a short period of time, but not the stuff you want to learn. But BlackHat, you're going next month, right?
Yes.
And you're speaking. Mm-hmm. What are you speaking on?
More about Flash, basically about a class of vulnerability I found quite a few of, just basically explaining how it works and some of the bugs I found.
Have you been to BlackHat before?
Yeah, I've been about 3 times.
Can you describe it? It's got this reputation of constant hacking of all of your personal devices, and buy a separate phone before you go, and don't even take your laptop to Vegas that week because it's just going to get...
Close your eyes and wear earplugs.
That too, yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't really buy any of that stuff. And who knows, maybe one year I'll get totally hacked and change my mind. But I think, there's a lot of paranoia about that, and I don't feel that way. Basically, I really enjoy both conferences. I really like the talks at BlackHat. There's a lot of basically interesting talks on every subject you can imagine, from hacking Windows to hacking refrigerators. And I think that they're fun events. And with regards to security, my biggest fear is always just getting stuff stolen. So, maybe I don't bring so much stuff I care about a lot. And obviously, don't plug stuff into untrusted networks, that sort of stuff. But I've never been a subscriber to the be completely paranoid and bring nothing with you sort of thing. And let's just say if I've been hacked so far, I don't know about it, maybe.
Well, I gave a talk last week, and part of it was that there are trolls and jerks and hackers, and they're all out there, and yet that shouldn't stop you from what you might truly enjoy. Be it fear of them it's just not enough to stop you, and it does stop so many people.
Yeah, I think that's actually really unfortunate.
So back to the Tamagotchis. You teach a class on how to hack them. Yeah,
it's funny. I've done it a few times. Basically, I made a dev kit for it. You can't see it because it's obviously a podcast, but
she brought me one.
Yes,
I know how much I like it when guests bring hardware.
Yes, I brought hardware with me. It's a Tamagotchi development board, and basically the way it works is there's this figure that goes on the Tamago, and it has a SIM card holder that has the same pinouts, and then so you hold your figure on it, and then you can program it over USB. And I have dev kit, including a assembler I call Tamagotchi. So you can assemble your code and then put it on and it'll run it. So basically my course is on how to basically write your own software for Tamagotchi. There's different levels. The easiest one is just putting your photo on it. Then you can write a music video. And then if you're really advanced, you can start writing directly in 6502.
And so what is this connector here? This must be what you connect to the Tamagotchi with?
Yeah, that is the biggest pain in the world. It is a SIM card connector. And those on a mobile device cost about 1.5 cents. If you try to buy them in quantities of like less than 1 million, they cost close to $1 each. That's definitely, other than the microcontroller, the most expensive component on that board. And yeah, that's what they used for the Tamagotchi figures, though. They were actually SIM connectors. And when you slide it on, it connects through a SIM connector. And that's a pretty much identical one on the board.
And so you can't modify the ROM inside the Tamagotchi?
No. So what my assembler does is it runs all the code out of RAM, and it takes care of things like paging. So you can just compile, and then it will, as you try and execute code, pull it out of the flash, put it in RAM, and then jump into it bit by bit. So not exactly for performance programming, but if you want to run large amounts of code, it'll kind of put it slowly into RAM as it executes, and then put it back into flash.
And so this RAM dance happens with the help of this Atmega?
Yeah, that's just for programming. Basically, it's just a flash programmer. And yeah, you just send it over USB. And then I felt like I had to draw tons of Tamagotchis on the board. It also has some other kind of features for the future, which is these IR components. And I put those on because a lot of Tamagotchis, especially early ones, support IR for communicating with each other. And I've never actually hacked the Tamagotchi IR, but if I ever do, I want the boards to be prepared.
Why did you decide to make a separate board? Because you wanted to teach these classes, or was there another impetus?
Basically, it was to teach the classes. The way I did it is I took the head of the Tamagotchi with the connector and then connected wires to it to an Arduino. But that wasn't scalable to be able to do the class with cutting like half then you'd need 1.5 Tamagotchis per participant, which would make it more expensive. So I ended up making these boards. They are basically equivalent to the Arduino LilyPad USB, and the only difference is they have the SIM connector on them. And they were $10 each to make, which is cheaper than cannibalizing a Tamagotchi. So that's why I went in that direction.
So you've reverse engineered these things, and you've had a good look at their code. I'm curious what their code looks like from a software engineering standpoint. Does it look like something well designed? I mean, does it have are you aware of the structure of how it handles events and how they structured things, or is it?
I mean, they did the best they could do considering the microcontroller. The only thing I find a bit odd about it, and I guess that, like, on one hand I don't like it, on the other hand I can't think of how I'd do it better. But basically, it's actually bizarrely similar to how a Nintendo works with the 6502, except the way paging works, it only half pages. So basically, the bottom half of the address space is always the same. It's always page 1, and then there's the top half of the address space, and then there's a register you change, and that page is a different memory in ROM.
We talked about this yesterday on a totally different processor.
Yes.
Yeah, well, 6502 does this a lot, but I'm sure other ones do too. Basically, the memory space isn't large enough for the ROM, so it has to do paging. So basically, this the Tamagotchi is full of like jump table after jump table after jump table. Basically, whenever it needs to change a page, or even if it doesn't, it'll basically go from jump table to jump table. And I think that makes it easier because you might be coming from somewhere that's a different page, that sort of thing. But it does make the code fairly difficult to follow because, right,
it's basically like and strings going everywhere.
Yeah, and within the code, it's like there's half of it's jump tables and like half of it's code, and even figuring out which is which can be a bit of a pain.
So this is something they probably wrote in assembly directly?
Yeah, it's possible. Like, I know General Plus does have a C compiler, but I'd be surprised based on what I'm seeing whether
I don't think they had one then.
Oh, no.
Not in 96 or even in 2000.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear. I've actually only been looking at modern Tamagotchis.
Oh, okay.
So the earliest one I looked at was in 2010.
Okay. Sorry. Well, then they might have C compilers. I don't know. Have you considered making a whole Tamagotchi yourself that is more easily hackable?
People ask me about that all the time, and I'd say like that's kind of not what interests me. I like the reverse engineering, the taking apart aspect. It's, I didn't do this because I wanted a device I had more control over, really.
So, changing subjects, you also created the Hardware Excuse Generator. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was really fun. Basically, I find I have this problem when working with hardware, and many people do as well, where something doesn't work exactly as you expected and you don't know why. And, sometimes you'll say stuff like, oh, it's crosstalk, I think it's because these two lines are too close to each other.
Ground loops. It's always ground.
Yeah, exactly. And when stuff breaks, I always say it was due to ESD, electrostatic discharge, even though I have no idea why my hardware broke. So I made this hardware excuse generator that just will generate your excuse, oh, there was crosstalk in C1 that led to spurious voltage in C2, whatever you can think of. And you're allowed to specify, what components you especially want to blame. And actually, I've had some fun with it. I'll be on IRC, and then, people will be talking about it, and then I'll just generate something with it and, put it in. And, occasionally I'll fool people. Most people will be like, wait a sec, that makes absolutely no sense. But a few people have commented, oh, you almost got me.
Okay, so I just type in the processor is stopping intermittently because of reasons.
Yep. I think just reason.
Because reason. I know you guys love listening to me type. Isn't that awesome? Listening to me type. The processor is stopping intermittently because reason. Wait, no, that was what I typed in. I didn't spell reason correctly. So I got the processor is stopping intermittently due to the SPI bus not being manufactured to specification. I think I've used that excuse. I've certainly heard many other people use the I2C bus instead, but it's a good excuse.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have anything about I2C in there. I think I need to update my database to include that too.
So this is web-based. What's it written in?
Python.
Cool. Do you have I guess it's web-based, so I probably can look at the code somewhere in here.
You can't look it in there. I'm trying to remember. I think I put on GitHub the excuse generator, so you can make excuse generators of your own. Yeah. It's probably worth saying my GitHub is Natashenka. It has all the Tamagotchi code as well as the excuse generator, if anyone's interested in checking it out.
And the link will be in the show notes, of course. Well, I guess I only have one more question, and that is, do you have a Tamagotchi on you?
No, I don't. I just brought the board as a demo, but I don't have one with me.
Do you have a Fitbit or other sort of health wearable?
I used to actually use a Fitbit. I actually even wrote a BlackBerry application for it because I was such a fan. But I don't know, now it's moving more towards the mobile apps that kind of track your fitness based on GPS. So I'm kind of trying that out for a while.
I have heard people say that I've even said I need to feed my Fitbit as a way of saying I have been sitting here for far too long. Please let me out of this meeting. It's all about the subtext. Do you think our health devices will become electronic pets?
Maybe, people say that, but I'm sorry, it's just not as good. It won't bring you as much joy as a Tamagotchi. I'm sorry. But, yeah, I think, it's an interesting concept, though. There was something about, the Tamagotchi, every video game. It's basically, arbitrary motives, arbitrary obstacles, that sort of thing. But there's something really compelling about it, wanting, for me, as a kid, it was always, I wanted to see, what's that next thing that it'll grow into? And then I liked for the more modern ones, the fact that, you want it to get the best grades in school, that sort of thing. So, I think that was the really fun part. And I think, people might eventually, try and figure out what it is that makes that appealing and, apply it to things that, maybe are more good for you, like doing exercise.
I really like how every time we talk about Tamagotchis, you just light up these are the best, coolest thing ever. I just really am impressed by your enthusiasm.
Well, I'm surprised they still seem to be thriving, right? In the face of mobile phones and tablets and other things.
It would be a simple app to write.
Yeah, well, they're really embracing it, and I think that's why they're starting to come back. There is a mobile app that's just a Tamagotchi you can download, and it's got ads on in-app purchases, so that's kind of one way they're making money off it. Actually, that was kind of cool. I visited Japan recently and went to the main Tamagotchi store. And yeah, in Japan, they're still quite big. And with the NFC Tamagotchis, there were actually promotions, some which I tried to partake in. So basically, it was stuff like at SoftBank, a big mobile phone store. You'd go into the store and you could tap your Tamagotchi and then get a phone for your Tamagotchi. There was also a restaurant called Coco Curry, and the same thing. You could go there and get curry for your Tamagotchi. And they're kind of like promos, which, encourage you to go to different stores that maybe you wouldn't go to before to get the items. So that's kind of something that I'd say, mobile phones aren't taking away from. I'd say it's, improving the ability to, tell people, like with these Tamagotchi for Yous, there's actually the app where you can buy stuff there, but it can also tell you about the promotions, and then you can go there. And it was even on the Tamagotchi, like I won some game and I got a coupon that you could use for 20% off, like actually at the department store where I bought it. So, I think they're really...
in America?
No, in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's amazing how they're like kind of using the ability to sync with mobile to do all sorts of things that you couldn't imagine, before they were connected.
I really can't. No.
Are they going to add BLE to them so you can transfer your Tamagotchi from one to another and then into a phone and then out? And then...
Brain transplants for the Tamagotchi?
No, not the brain, just the creature. And then you'd have it and it would be empty because you'd transferred it somewhere.
Well, they don't do that for brains, but they actually do for the new ones, do it for items. So you can basically transfer the items to different Tamagotchis, and the same with the phone. For whatever reason, they've gone in the NFC, not the BLE direction, probably because of the cost of the component. But
for now.
Yeah, who knows what the future will look like.
I just want to transfer everybody's into mine, have this huge crowd of Tamagotchis in the one device.
In the little egg thing.
Yeah, I wish. Like, actually, I've really been enjoying the new ones just because, like, what they can do is, like, nuts. For example, like, I'm going through and I'm like, what is this? And it says, like, cleaning closet. And I'm like, whatever. Then one day I come home and my Tamagotchi has made a mess and there's, like, garbage things all over. And then I have to go to the cleaning closet and get it to use the vacuum cleaner to, like, clean its apartment up.
Have you heard of a game called Sims?
Yes, I actually did like The Sims a lot.
I want to ask you personal questions like, do you have kids, and do you think having kids will decrease your Tamagotchi? But I think instead I'm going to ask Christopher if he has any last questions as we finish this up.
So there's a bunch of different Tamagotchis, and there have been for years. Do you have like a favorite model or creature or?
Yeah, I guess. So, I mean, it's changed as I've hacked them. I think I like the ones that I can hack the best now.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I'd say, it's a hobby, but I like try and spend a reasonable amount of money on it. So like the really cool Tamagotchis, especially the old ones, are really expensive. So I don't have any. I've been focusing more on the modern ones because those ones you can still get like for $10 each.
And the old ones are vintage. Is there like a vintage trading rare Tamagotchi from 97 kind of thing?
Yeah, there's definitely that. Now, I go to a reverse engineering group, and I do... There's a lot of people that do the more hardware stuff. They'll decap chips and look at it under a microscope. So I did donate. I had just the board of an original version 1 Tamagotchi. So I donated that, and they were able to quite easily look at it through a microscope and make an emulator for it.
Oh, so they looked at it through the microscope and they could emulate the processor. Could they look at the ROMs and the code?
Yeah, that's what they did. They were both able to figure out the microcontroller, which I think was an ASIC, so that makes it a bit more difficult. And yeah, then they were able to actually look at the ones and zeros on the ROM and use that to decode the code and make an emulator basically by writing no software or anything, just by looking at the board really close.
Neat. Well, Natalie, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, I don't. Thanks a lot for having me.
My guest has been Natalie Silvanovich, hacker of Tamagotchis and security engineer. Special thank you to Alvaro for suggesting we invite Natalie on the show. I really enjoyed hearing about the Tamagotchis. Thank you, as always, to Christopher White for co-hosting, producing, and raising his Yoda Tamagotchi, or killing it, I'm not quite sure. It might have run away. And of course, thank you for listening. I usually have a couple of final thoughts here, and I try to make whichever one is relevant, the one that I choose. But this week, there was only one. It's from Shel Silverstein. I made myself a snowball as perfect as can be. I thought I'd keep it as a pet and let it sleep with me. I made it some pajamas and a pillow for its head. Then last night it ran away, but first it wet the bed.